We are really, really fortunate to have Richard Goss with us this afternoon. I consider him a good friend. I've known him for a long time. He does a fabulous job at a myriad of different things for the Credit Union National Association and for Vermont credit unions and our Vermont Association. At CUNA, I guess technically his title is Chief Political Officer. He's got his finger on the pulse of everything related to campaign politics and grassroots activation, and has a deep understanding and involvement in the legislative process, and has been deeply embedded in political and not so political communications, consumer surveys, and so on and so forth, polling, all kinds of stuff for the National Association of Home Builders, the American Insurance Association, and now we're fortunate to have him at CUNA for, and I forget, Richard, how long you've been at CUNA, but it's going on quite a while now.
It's over 20 years. That's
wow.
Longer than I ever thought I would be anywhere. But you know what? Once credit unions get a hold of you, I guess they keep you.
Well, if you're doing a good job, they keep you. So it must be you have been, if you've been doing this for 2 decades for us. So thank you very much for joining us, Richard. Today, I need to point out is he normally would, well, not normally, today would have been off because he too would be recuperating from his Easter high from this past weekend. But I twisted his arm a little bit to pinch hit for Senator Bernie Sanders, who was unable to be here with us today. So Richard, thank you so much for jumping in at the last minute to talk to us about all the things that you do at CUNA and some insights that I think everyone's going to find really interesting this afternoon.
Well, thank you, Joe. And I'm hoping everybody's just, if you have a question, a thought, a comment, a concern, please jump in. I'm going to throw up some PowerPoint slides in a second. I know that these Zoom calls sometimes feel like death by PowerPoint, but I do have some survey research, and really what I kind of want to do is show you how we use it. Because we talk a lot about research and a lot about advocacy, but we never really show people how we marry it together or why we do it. So I kind of want to get into that, but I want to talk a little bit about just in general what we do on the grassroots front to reach out. And I know, Joe is obviously at the heartbeat of a lot of what we do. Joe serves as chair of the ACUL State Issues Committee. So he hears about the state issues from across the spectrum, from coast to coast and east to west and north to south and everything in between, because there are a lot of issues that start at the state level that end up on the federal agenda at some point. We see this with data breach. We see this with privacy legislation. We've seen this with cannabis as it's maturing into a broader issue. I mean, there's several different things, and they all start at the state level. And Joe's work on that committee is paramount. Joe's, as a member of that committee, also serves on a national advocacy fund, which helps us in the grassroots arena try to take some of this research and some of what I'm going to show you and put into action, and also gives us the ability to respond if there's an emergency in a state, if there's a bank attack, or if there's an issue emerging that needs attention. So we can collectively pull resources from all the states to a particular issue that might come to a state near you soon. So, you have a voice in the leadership and the direction that we take the CUNA resources, and everything we do is in conjunction with our leagues, with our state partners, and therefore with credit unions. So we try to make sure that we have unity throughout. In doing that, one of the, just a couple of key programs we have, I'll just highlight real quick. We have Project Zip Code. That really does give us a census of the credit union strength in state and federal legislative districts. I know we have, I think, 13 credit unions in Vermont that have been active on PZC. I know, I think there were 4 updates so far this year. But that is something that if you have done it or haven't done it, please consider doing it, because it really does show our strength within those districts, particularly those state legislative districts. We have a new feature now that actually shows the percentage of membership a credit union may have in a district. So you may be a smaller credit union, but in a particular state house or senate district, you may have a pretty good percentage of your membership there. Again, showing your relevance to that lawmaker. It's an extremely powerful tool and one that we use in about everything we do. It helps us on the political front if we're doing partisan communications for a candidate. It helps us on the grassroots front if we're making arguments for an issue. And it just shows the credit union strength and what we're doing in our communities and as we talk to lawmakers. The member activation program, and I know Vermont FCU just went out. I think with the one on the advancing communities, and we have, I think 4 or 5 credit unions in Vermont that have participated in member activation program. We misnamed that. We should have called it member education program, but member activation sounds so much better as an acronym than MEEP. But education is the key here. And the program really started because we had asked credit unions to engage with their members, and they said, well, our members don't know anything about this. So as we come into the period of time where we're trying to educate folks on a particular issue, again, data security, data breaches, those are good issues to really talk to members about. We try to provide materials and templates that we can have those discussions with members so that they can be up to speed if action is needed down the road. And as I will show you in a minute with our some of our research, it never, ever hurts just to remind them of what credit unions are and what they're about, and trying to bring that tangential relevance to their day-to-day lives. It's extremely important as we move through, and I hope our numbers will demonstrate that. And then, obviously, we have a group. You have 6 members called the Political and Grassroots Network, and that's really just where we take folks at a credit union who are involved in advocacy, give them periodic updates, and it helps us to guide what resources we bring to the table and what we offer credit unions to help employees. I remember one time we talked to a couple of credit unions, and they said, our members probably know more what's going on in our employees because we've been doing MAP, and we haven't really had that opportunity to inform our employees of some of these issues. So we try to help create programs that do it. So each one of these programs is kind of targeted at a different audience. Therefore, we can tailor resources and provide those. And again, not all these resources are ours. Sometimes credit unions, they share resources with us. It's done a really great job on certain things. Our leagues do fabulous work. We try to take that and utilize those resources and package them and give them, make sure they're shared. So that's kind of, it's kind of a cooperative network of advocacy, and that's kind of what we're trying to create. I am going to quickly just share my screen and walk through this. There are more slides here. Don't let the number of slides scare you, because I will go through some of these quite quickly. And hopefully everybody will be able to see. Joe, you're good seeing the PowerPoint?
Yes, we are.
All right. So I just really quickly just want to, again, Joe mentioned we do a lot of survey research. Why we do it? We want to know how people feel. We want to know what they think, and we obviously survey our members, but these are surveys of voters, and we've been doing these surveys since 1999 on a regular basis, and the questions change, although some remain constant simply because we want to track those. A survey is normally a snapshot in time. Some of these trends and some of these variances we see really do have a lot more base than a snapshot in time, just because we've asked the questions so often for so many years. We also do surveys with our states as necessary. We've done them in Vermont in the past. I know when we had an issue in Montpelier, Joe, I want to say it's been 10 years ago now, but we did some survey research there before we did some ads and different things. So, I mean, it's very important to make sure if we're going to actually put money and effort behind an issue that we have the message right. One of the things that we tested, particularly as we kind of went into this campaign, Advancing Communities, is, really what is it that people care about when it comes to the credit union? And it's that member ownership. It's the not-for-profit financial cooperative model that with the low fees and the returning of earnings to members and the lower cost of a loan and all those issues, both consumer, but also when you get into the structural, it drives people to a bond that banks just don't have. And it's our great advantage. And then obviously protecting families and then helping them if there's a job loss, if there's an emergency, helping them over medical bills and those sorts of things. And then, providing affordable services to America, rural and immigrant communities in our cities. Those are all positive messages. And then a really important one is investing in the local community. And when we say invest in the local community, a lot of people just automatically go to that contribution you give to a school or to Boys and Girls Club or whatever charitable group. It's more than that. It's really talking about the individuals and what we're doing to help our members in the community that tend to resonate. And again, we get a lot of that, not just from survey research, but also from conversations and focus groups, which we conduct generally every 2 years anyway, and throughout the country. And then, obviously the helping folks with children going to college, helping buying those first homes. Those are all positive issues that we can talk about, and particularly in ways that maybe other financial institutions can't talk about in terms of what we do. But, we also look at ourselves. Whenever we do a campaign, the first thing we do is look at what we say about ourselves or about our campaign. Then we look at what we say about our opponent. The next grid is what does our opponent say about us? And then the fourth grid is what is our opponent saying about themselves. It's kind of how we sequence our thought process. And before we can really talk about our opponent or an issue, we really kind of have to define ourselves. And, some of those messages I put out there before about being not-for-profit, a financial cooperative, returning members, kind of getting into the structural part is really a key element in bringing forth credibility. But when we looked at credit union websites, and we picked websites simply because websites are something that you don't have to, it's not like an ad where you have to pay a lot of money to put it on the air. It's just something that's out there, and every credit union has one. How does that look different than other financial institutions' websites? And when we look at it, and again, just the front page, there's only about 2% of them, there's a clear difference. You're on a credit union website. There's just something out there that stands out, member driven, just that right in your face. About 7% have something out there, for our members or something, but it doesn't really get into that structural element that much. About 22%, there's just really no difference. You couldn't tell if you were on a bank site or if you were on a credit union site or whatever. And then, about 69% of the credit unions have learn more or about us. So those kind of, 2 or 3 click where you can get more into that. So that's one of the things that we saw right up front. One of the things we do know in terms of our members themselves, that less than half really know that there's any kind of difference between a credit union and a bank. About 42% see some difference. About 39-40% see pretty much alike, and then there's the I don't know category. One of the things that is more concerning to me, and this has been something we're really trying to tackle, is the not-for-profit status. If you look, only less than a third, 29%, know that we're not for profit. That means that you've got 70% of the people out there who either think we're for profit or just don't know. They're confused. So that's an extremely that's an extremely important part if we're going to talk about our structure and differentiate ourselves from others. As I mentioned, about 42-44% of the voters themselves belong to a credit union. About 22 to 23% consider credit union a primary financial institution. And I know a lot of credit unions measure that PFI in a number of ways. We simply ask it on the survey because we can't get into too much detail. Where do you have your principal checking and savings account? And that's kind of the identifier for us. But then we ask an important question, and this kind of came up as we were doing the survey research behind the member activation program. Do you consider yourselves as a member or a customer? And the reason we ask that question is affinity. Really, you know, I can ask you if you like a blue shirt or a green shirt. And you could say, I like a green shirt if I, you know, but I didn't ask you whether you liked a shirt. Maybe you don't. Maybe you live, you know, in the Bahamas and shirt's just not on your list. So I never asked the really important question. What do I gave you a choice, but I didn't ask you what you care about. And I think when we get to the value proposition, building that value proposition is what makes people have that connectivity to you. And that's one of the things that we really work hard on to try to build that. So when you look at member versus customer, about half people who would say that they belong to a credit union feel that they're a member. A little less than that feel that they're a customer. But when you look at PFIs, obviously, as you would imagine, more feel like a member than a customer. And obviously members that are not PFIs, so they might have gotten through the credit union through indirect lending or some other form, they feel more like a customer than a member. But those people who feel as a member, whether they're a PFI or not, are also more willing to take action on behalf of the credit union if a legislative need arises, is another question we ask. And it's always member trumping it. So why do we care about all this? Well, as we come out of COVID and as we look at the state budgets and the budget crunch, you know, we find that sometimes our biggest tax threats, we used to always talk about bank attacks because banks were always agitating for credit unions to be taxed, to limit the credit union charter. As we got into these budget shortfalls, we started seeing more and more states, legislatures talking about where can we find additional dollars. So a lot of the threat for our tax exemption wasn't coming necessarily from the banks, but just from the economic situations in the various states. Now, you're very lucky, Vermont, in that you have a state that's not on the list of ones that are in the budget crisis that some states are in, but we have a number of states. I know NCSL and the Governors Association basically were estimating that a third of the states weren't ready for even a moderate recession, much less than what we went through with COVID. So when we look at the state map, we have several states that are of concern when we look at budget implications. So we have to be prepared for that. But what we don't want to do is to be in a defensive posture on it. We want to be in a positive, proactive posture. So, we were challenged by leadership to come up with a plan of action to be proactive and positive rather than defensive and negative. And there's so many advantages to being proactive versus negative. And one is we're not having to push off. It's one thing to push off against the banks, but now you're having to push off against the legislators themselves. When you're talking about some, it's their bill to raise taxes, to raise revenues. That's a lose-lose proposition. So we really had to get out in front. So how do we prevent and repel a future tax on our tax status or our charter? And how do we get really proactive? And through that, how can we create a narrative that makes it easier for us to pass positive legislation for credit unions? That's kind of the genesis behind Advancing Communities. And Advancing Communities is really just a positive look at credit unions, really looking at the credit union difference through the lens of the community. What are we doing? Why are we different? One of the things we did is also looked at the various areas and pillars. Rural areas are something that's very much concerned of a lot of states because these areas have, in some cases, fallen behind economically. Small business, you've probably seen so much, especially coming out of COVID, the need for resources for small business. And we have the underserved communities, those areas, that are becoming areas of banking where banking deserts have occurred. Some of the more urban areas that have just been left behind. So, looking at those and then rebuilding our communities coming out of COVID, coming out of bad economic times. How do we help rebuild? And then we basically took some of the analytics, and we have a great team with Mike Shank and his folks and our econ team that crunch numbers from HMDA data to in-plan data on taxes, any number of things they can get their hands on, and really showing where credit unions are actually, making a difference significantly. So we take the narrative along with the numbers, and then we add to it the stories. The stories that I'm hoping that maybe this is maybe my call to action to you all. The stories, and these are not overly produced. These are simple stories. A lot of people just literally take their cell phones and do selfies on it. Perfectly, that's actually preferred. Talking about what they're doing to help their members from the credit union perspective, or from a member's perspective, what their credit unions did to help them. We have stories around financial planning and literacy. We have stories around helping folks refinance cars who had, or homes where they had high, interest rates. The credit union helped them get their credit score up, get into a better loan, showing that we're not out there just to make a loan or to turn a profit. We're out there to serve a member. Any story that goes to that narrative is kind of the story we want. We have stories around what we've done to help people who are like teachers, or people in the medical community, or people that are firefighters, first responders, veterans. Any of those kind of stories have been great. And we have in each state on Advancing Communities has their own page with their own analytics and the stories on those pages. So you go to the map on Advancing Communities, you click on it, then you can find those stories. And there are a few states that actually have a broader website where we have an active campaign, because we're either fighting a legislative battle or trying to promote something proactive for credit unions. And the state has invested in a little bit more robust site for that. And then it's not enough just to tell stories, but or to have this. It's also important to talk to legislators, because this site is really designed to do that, to be the voice of legislators. And you can see there the states that have gone out, including Vermont, to their legislators, welcome them into the new session, and kind of talking about what the credit unions in the state have been doing around COVID, or what issues are at hand. And so a little different style. Again, there are 50 states out there. There are 50 state legislatures out there. It's not a one size fits all. It's a model and a set of research that can be blended and melded to help each state as we go forward. Just a few quick things on the research. One of the things we ask, and we just got this back. We just did this in February. Got it back just before the GAC, and we asked people about their personal finances. And we had done this in pre-COVID, which was very fascinating to see. But when we looked at rating of the economic and basically the pandemic and how it affected you personally, did you have how did you feel about your local economy? It's 56% positive, 44% negative. It was 78% positive and 22% prior to the pandemic. You look in the rural area, it's even worse. It's only 43% positive and 57% negative. And I pulled rural out just to show you how certain areas can differ dramatically. When we ask about personal, this is how you, not how your neighbors are or how your community's doing, but how are you doing? We have 71% positive. That's down 6 points from the year before, but not nearly as much as they felt the community. I mean, you saw a 22% or 22 percentage point drop in the economy of the community, but only a 6% in personal. And then when you get into rural, you see 62% positive, but it's not nearly as high as the 71%, and then you've got a greater negative there. And then 34% say they would not have cash or savings to meet an unexpected bill or emergency. That's up 21%. And then in the rural area, that number again is even higher, just showing that the attention that a lot of lawmakers are putting on the rural area is justified. We ask about our tax exemption. We do have good, strong support initially for that. Banks and other arguments that are thrown out there, and we throw the best arguments they can throw out there to test. We do drop significantly. In some states, we do this individually. We can get it below 50%. And then we look at when we throw our pro credit union arguments back at it, even after the negative, we can bring it back. And that's the main thing. We want to always make sure that we can bring the argument back. But one of the things we always talk about is local economy and growth, and how that credit unions are better equipped and better options. And you can see there by the question, which of these is a smarter way to boost the local economies? Use of government, state government tax money to invest in economic development, or give credit unions more tools. And basically, we win that when we talk about whenever we can push ourselves off against another government program or freeing up credit unions to do more, we do better. I just take it real quick into just a current issue, and one you may have heard, because I know I'm filling in for Senator Sanders, but I'm going to talk about one of his issues here, and that's postal banking. It's something that he's brought up. There's initially a lot of support for postal banking. 56% support it. Positive messages on postal banking talk about the people that need to be served. You can get that up to 67 relatively easily. So there's an appetite out there. Senator Sanders and others are not talking about something that doesn't have some traction. But then when we talk about it, what are alternatives and what are solutions? Credit unions are a better alternative. And it gives us a chance to talk about filter membership and restrictions and lifting those. And when we start talking about that, then all of a sudden we become a better option than postal banking. And so, again, message and messaging. And again, I just threw out some highlights here, and I don't want to just take up all the time talking through a PowerPoint, but I just wanted to give you a sense of how we use the messaging, how we look ahead, and kind of where we're going with it from here. And Joe, I know I kind of sped through that pretty quick, but I was hoping to maybe get some insight from folks here, reactions, and anything that they're seeing that we may be missing, or just in general conversation about what's going on in Vermont and the credit unions there, and what more we can do to help.
Thank you so much, Richard. I always find all that information that you're sharing enlightening, and know you can go way, way deeper on any one of those and all of those different areas, because I've seen you do it many times before. So there was something that came to my mind when you were going over some of the data, when you were talking about earlier on about people's awareness of credit unions and that they're a member of a cooperative and whatnot. And in it, this is going back in time, but back to the Great Recession, I guess it was called, 2008, 2009. And there was it's a bad time to have the name bank in your name, and a good time to be a cooperative. And there was a lot of, the move your money movement, and a lot of, people advocating to be a member of a co-op and so on and so forth. So thinking back to that time, do you think there was a bump in people's the general public's understanding of whether they're a member of a cooperative or not, and that it's just kind of stayed flat since then, or was that like a bubble and an up and down and here today, gone tomorrow?
You know, that really was a snapshot in time. And it's funny when you say cooperative. Cooperative plays different in different parts of the country. Some places it plays very well, and some places kind of falls flat. And it's all about what people are used to. I know coming out of what the major difference in 2008, 2009 is the banks really took a hit. They were blamed a lot for that period of time and for the economic downturn. We saw national bank numbers favorabilities go down to 16, 18%. Even community banks got as low as the mid 50s. Credit unions remained high. We remained in the upper 70s, upper 60s to upper 70s, depending on what part of the country you were in. The one thing that's very different coming out of COVID is banks are seen as good players in some respects, is solid players, heroes coming out of COVID. So their numbers are actually as high as I've seen them in a while. Community banks and credit union favorability are fairly equal across the board, and we've seen not just nationally, but in individual states. When you start when you start peeling the onion back and you talk about the profits and where the profits go, and where people might not use the actual word cooperative, they actually see cooperative when we talk about how we return money back to members, how we keep money in the community. And it's really more of a show me. And once you show them that, it's funny because we talk about rates and stuff. Rates are always going to attract people. I mean, if I can get a better rate on a car loan here than I can over there, I'm going to go to where I can get that. But then, when I say you got this better rate because you've become a member, and part of being a member means that we're not going to just look to make money. And then you start educating them. That's when you get them. And so, but I would say, Joe, to your answer, the cooperative element does play, and it plays in certain areas more than others. But in general, one of the things that really has changed also from 2008, 2009 are that, the online banking, all the other options, Apple Pay, all that's coming into its own that wasn't really that established or just kind of blossoming coming out of 2008, 2009. So there's a lot more options for people out there. And I think that's something we always have to keep an eye on. And as people get more tech savvy, the tech part of it is becoming extremely important. That's one of the reasons, Joe, we talk about in the State Issues Committee. It's one of the reasons that broadband and a lot of other things that we never dreamt as credit unions that would become issues for us are starting to become issues for us.
Hey, questions, comments, thoughts for Richard from anybody? Just jump right.
Richard, if we could take off on that point you were making about technology at the end, are you seeing in the data that one of the reasons the banks have rebounded is their leadership in technology delivery to consumers?
John, not specifically that question. We have seen, particularly in focus groups, though, that people really do relate to the technology that the banking community is offering. And we have not done a national focus group since COVID. Matter of fact, it's so funny because in February, I was doing focus groups in Spokane, Seattle, and Olympia just before we shut down. And we were having a conversation about technology and the bank's technology. And they perceptually, the banks have better technology than credit unions. That is a perception, and I'm not saying reality, but a perception. And technology is a key element to how a lot of people perceive us. I think I would be willing to think, I would be willing to bet though that technology after COVID for credit unions has probably improved a little bit, because I think a lot of credit unions really pushed to get to reach those members in areas that with their technology they had before. One of the things too, our membership skews older, and I think that's so a lot of older people don't either appreciate technology or don't use it as much as the younger folks do.
Thanks.
Other thoughts from anybody?
For those, this is Jean Guyard from Vermont Federal Credit Union.
Hi, Jean.
My question was on those states that we saw that were on the red side of worrying about where their tax money is going to be coming from. Are you concerned that some of those may use credit unions to be able to increase their tax sources? And if one credit union, if we see one state start, charging taxes to credit unions, do you think that's going to kind of be a snowball?
Yes, and yes. There are several states that are in really tough shape. Illinois is one that first comes to mind. They probably have as much debt as any state and more trouble balancing a budget than just about anybody right now. In dollars that used to look relatively insignificant, once you cobble together a lot of those dollars, at least in some of these cases, it's not even the significance of it. It's just they're trying to show they're doing something. They're doing everything they can. And that's a dangerous place to be. And once it starts in one place, I guarantee you it's going to go to others. One, the banking community is going to use that as a rally cry. Illinois, right now, the banks are not our threat. It's really the legislature. But for years, Illinois was the scene of some of the worst bank attacks we'd had. The whole idea of a family of four pays more in taxes than all the credit unions in Illinois started in Illinois. And then we saw Iowa, the neighboring state, really, they got the first credit union bill to tax credit unions passed through their state Senate that had to be killed in the House. And so it would be a bad omen. I think people in Vermont should be as concerned for a tax in a credit union tax in Illinois as people in Illinois are. I don't think it's imminent, by the way, but I will say this: Illinois just got CRA passed in Illinois, and that bill happened in a veto session right after the elections, the day before the new legislature was getting sworn in, and they took the federal model and they got that through, passed. CRA was mentioned one time on the floor of the House, not once in the Senate. Bill passed, and it was on them before they could do anything to defend it. And we're now working on that issue with them. So a tax bill could happen in similar fashion if we're not careful.
In the Vermont State House in normal times, Richard, the Vermont legislature directs the administration to every couple of years present it with a list of all of the so-called tax expenditures of state government, which is the tax exemptions that it hands out right to everybody. And it wants to know what is the value of that tax exemption to state government. What would it collect if those entities were taxed? And fortunately, the estimate of tax revenue from Vermont credit unions, which would be limited to state charters in Vermont, is a big number, but it's far overshadowed by other kinds of organizations and whatnot on that list. So we're not at the top of the list, fortunately. But we get a lot more nervous every time that comes out than when the bankers start touting about, unfair tax credit unions and all this kind of stuff. Because it's a lot easier with a legislature to, at least in our experience, to defend against the bankers than it is, like you said earlier, to be trying to counter even one legislator that is trying to make a point. And once they start down that path, it's really difficult and a lot more disconcerting to counter legislators that have that in their mind. So, that brings me back around to one of the very first things you referenced was Project Zip Code. And we don't take those numbers of credit union people in every voting district and just put it out for public consumption. But we use it judiciously with legislators in circumstances like this and with others for other reasons and whatnot. And I have to tell you, every time, and Project Zip Code is, I don't know how old it is, but it's been around a long time, right? And I don't know why the bankers haven't latched on to this kind of idea yet. But every time we mention to a legislator about the estimate of how many credit union members are in that legislator's constituency, eyes really open up and you get a look of shock from whatever legislator it is. Because every legislator in Vermont, and no matter what the district is, the numbers of credit union members are significant to that legislator in his or her constituency. So I can't stress how effective that program is and how great it is that you keep modernizing it and keep encouraging us to participate in that. It's awesome.
I actually inherited Project Zip Code from the Campaign for Consumer Choice, and I came in to CUNA right in the middle of that campaign. And at the time, people were sending in zip codes on Excel spreadsheets, on WordPerfect documents, on I typed out, I even saw some typed out, and it was not sustainable. So we got with a group and made it to where we could do it. And originally we used to send discs to people and they load it on their computers and they send back the encrypted code. And now everything's online on a secure server and there's so little data needed. We don't even need the name or anything from the member. All we need is just a street address and a zip code. And then we can go back and match how many led those legislators to that, and then get the de-encryption. And so it's been, we've worked very hard, and we've worked very hard with NCUA and others on the privacy to make sure that we're not doing anything to violate. And it has really evolved and it's become a great tool. And quite frankly, we just added that feature about the percentage of membership in a particular district. And that came from our friends out on the West Coast who said, hey, we'd love to have this. Can we make it happen? And we said, yeah, I mean, that's a calculation. That's pretty easy to do. And so we were able to do that and add it into the program. And so we've approved, and as our leagues and credit unions tell us something they need, we can try to improve that as we go.
Of course, you and I use it for advocacy purposes, but every one of the people on the line that are involved in the management of a credit union get to look at those numbers and find out how many members some other credit union has in their geographical footprint, right? So there's some other sidebar uses for it as well.
We've actually had credit unions get together and open shared branching because they saw a mutual benefit from it too. So, but a credit union, but Joe, a credit union can see all their data obviously matched. Nobody else can see that. We can only see the aggregate numbers.
Any other comments from anybody? So there is one other thing that I was going to mention, Richard, and that's when the last thing that you were focused on before discussion time here was on that Advancing America website and how new that is and what's in there. And yes, we uploaded a video for legislators to that, which we drove legislators to at the beginning of the session. But the whole thing about storytelling in there, I would think that pretty much everybody that's on the line right now that's either been with us to a Hike to Hill visit in DC or been in the Vermont State House when we've testified on one thing or another. I think most everybody has witnessed how lawmakers, be they federal or state, are so keen on hearing those human interest kind of stories that you were referencing. And it doesn't mean we can, shy away from the data collection and the numbers of, how many paycheck protection loans that you made and all that kind of stuff. But they really zero in on those unique stories. And I know at least a couple people in the line here have shared those for us with legislators, of, even if it's only, helping one business, one sole proprietor, or one unfortunate individual member situation or whatnot. If it's in their constituency or related to their constituency, they really sit up and listen to those stories and take keen interest in those, as you well know.
I hope that everybody will go on Advanced Communities, take a look at it. You're going to see a variety of stories told in different ways. Actually, I don't even want to count how many stories during this pandemic that I have literally recorded on Zoom, calling in, having a member on, or somebody from the credit union telling their story. We can edit it up, in just a day or two, have it on the site. We've done a lot of that and would be happy if, Joe, if you have any of your credit unions that want to go that route, we're happy to help assist in any way we can to do that. I just did St. Louis Community. I did 2 stories for them a week before last. And then Winona Nava has got one on some predatory lending practices that they've launched, not just legislative effort, but also products at their credit unions to try to give people alternatives. So those are, those are the kind of things that we can really sink our teeth into, get some of those stories up. And we're going to be doing a blog element too, so we can talk a little bit about various issues. Broadband being one of them, because think about a lot of lawmakers don't know that credit unions even care about that issue. We talked about CRA, what are we doing to serve, minority communities, women-owned businesses, any number of different issues that people care about and are having dialogue about. What are we doing about it? And a blog from a credit union, along with a story from, a women business owner that's been helped by the credit union. Those are powerful messages. And you take the number, as Joe mentioned, you take the numbers, those stories, and that information. All of a sudden, a lawmaker sees it, they read it, they begin to own it. They start telling the story. I don't know how many times you ever watch C-SPAN. I hope you're not like me. You watch it a lot. I'll watch it because I have to, but you watch every member go up there. Well, I just heard the story from, Jane Jones and, and back scratch, and she was telling me, and it's every legislator has that. They take it to the floor. They take it with them. And then they always like to recite a number or two. And I think if you look at PPP lending, for example, we have a great story to tell about what credit unions did on PPP. And then you add a couple of businesses that were helped. And, especially, there was one that we did, Joe, I think you've heard me talk about this one, that was in Tennessee. There was called Seats for Change. And this guy had a lawn service business, and they hired people from halfway houses and people that had been, hard to get back in the job market, to give them a second chance. And they got a loan from a credit union, from actually University of Tennessee credit union I'm very, very fond of, given my background. But they had a loan that they gave this guy that kept him afloat during this. And it was I think $10,000. So, it was not a big amount, but banks didn't want to deal with it. It was too small. We saw the same thing in Illinois with the Soup and Share, where a lady got a $5,000 loan so they could expand the service from their 4-county area because so many people were in need with the pandemic. So I'm sure as I tell those stories, you could probably think of a half a dozen stories your own. I had one in West Virginia. Joe, I don't remember, I told you this one, but one of the credit unions up there, I forgot the name of the program, but the program where they help folks file their taxes, they opened it up to the entire county, and they opened through their drive-through. And this is the word. And so they were literally helping people file their taxes through their drive-through window. She tells this story. It's a great story. And matter of fact, I think, I'm not sure, but I think it was Joe Manchin actually that got that story and was very interested in it. So we may hear him tell that story at some point.
You know, legislators like that, lawmakers like that are, you know, they can make or break the future of credit unions. And so if it takes stories like that have actually happened to garner their favor, it's a great thing to do. Thank you so much, Richard, for spending this time with us on the Monday after Easter. We greatly appreciate it. And for everyone on the line, unless, Richard, you have a concern about this, I will share that PowerPoint with everyone, or a link to it in the next, or whichever update coming out daily that has the archive version of this presentation. I'll also put a link in there to the Advancing Communities site, so you can all go there and see what it's like. And I think there's some information, Richard, we can easily provide for people to learn how to upload their own stories, and whether they can do videos or you can just do it right up in a picture or whatever.
You can do it literally right from it. The site pretty much walks you through it, but we have a how-to video, a little demonstration that Kristen Prather on our team put together, and we can get you all of that too.
Awesome. Thank you very much again, Richard, for all of your help this afternoon. For pinch hitting for Bernie Sanders, I won't tell him that you talked about postal banking today.
You know what, Senator Sanders, you know what, he can be for postal banking all day if he wants credit unions to be the ones providing the service as post office. So
he is a big credit union supporter.
He is.
And for everyone on the line, thank you very much for joining us. This hour next week, we'll be chatting with Lindsay Curley, who is the Vermont Secretary of Commerce and Economic Development. So that should be an interesting discussion. Thank you all for being on the line with us today.
Thanks, everybody.